Thank you very much, Lascan Corla. And I suppose just taking the last point that was made by the Deputy first, and that is that there should be a good turnout on the 10th of November to show just where the Irish people's priorities are, that they are fully supportive of what we're proposing here today. And I want in the first instance to compliment Minister Frances Fitzgerald for the great work she has done in a very short space of time to bring all the elements of this legislation and the provisions for the referendum together. It is something that others have toiled and strived over a considerable period of time, 30 years approximately at this stage, since the first efforts were made to bring about the introduction of provision in relation to children's rights and their protection into the Constitution. And this has been done in very rapid time, 18 months, to be able to get the provisions here before us, and a target date then for the referendum itself to take place in the month of November. That's absolutely exemplary. And also I must compliment the Minister in relation to the good work she has done in terms of adoption, that only last Monday she signed the agreement with Vietnam reopening and restarting adoptions between the two countries, and that is a tremendous achievement as well, and again considering the amount of effort that was made in the past without any achievement having been reached. So I want to compliment Minister Frances Fitzgerald very strongly for the active role that she has taken since becoming a minister in delivering what she committed to delivering, what is in the programme for government, but what was often promised in the past but was not delivered. Can I say, Lascan Corla, that it really is incredible that almost 100 years have elapsed since an emerging nation promised to cherish the children of the nation equally. And that was one of the most quoted parts of our 1960 proclamation. And that it is only now that we're giving recognition and protection to the children in our Constitution. And in the intervening period, child abuse was widespread in our society. Various reports, together with the testimonials of over 13,000 children who are now adults who came before the Residential Institutions Redress Board, they all reveal the stories of abuse that have taken place in the past, physical, sexual, emotional, mental abuse in the various institutions that were in the control of the state, and indeed others that were not in the control of the state but should have been. So this is one of the great failures of over 90 years of Irish statehood and of Irish independence, and it is, of course, has totally undermined that commitment that was made in the proclamation. Indeed, I remember that as far back as 1979, when I was chairman of an organisation called the Prisoners' Rights Organisation, and having established an inquiry into the prison system that was chaired by Sean McBride, senior counsel, and Professor Luke Hulsman, and with the present president and the previous president, Mary McAleese, were all members of, that at that time we conducted a survey of 200 ex-prisoners living in Dublin for the public inquiry, and we discovered that over 80% of the survey cohort had spent much of their childhood in reformatories or industrial schools. And remember that the legislation that was there very often committed them to very many years in schools as well, and very often they were forgotten in either the reformatories or the industrial schools. So that these people were really damaged by the system that they had spent their youth in, and then they were further damaged in their lives, so their youth and their adult lives were ruined. So for the first time, this bill and this referendum gives Irish children full rights as Irish citizens and in their own right in our Constitution, and that is crucially important, that they're getting these rights by virtue of their own right as Irish citizens, not through proxy, not through anybody else. There is, however, something incongruous that when the debate starts, and it is now about to start, and it's almost perverse that in conducting a public debate over the next 6 weeks, where 50% of the time will be given to the small minority in our country, who may argue against the proposed assertion of children's rights in our Constitution, as outlined in the referendum proposals. The media, I believe, and in particular RTE, should explore every mechanism for a balanced and fair debate within the constraints of the Supreme Court judgment, so as to avoid creating a false polarisation dictated by a crude allocation of time on the basis of virtual opposition. I welcome the fact that the long-awaited children's referendum has finally been put to the Irish people. Too many years have passed since it was first suggested, and too often this issue has been put off to another day. Minister Fitzgerald is, as I said, to be greatly congratulated for publishing the text of the proposed amendment to the Constitution and for ensuring that the proposed amendment has such broad support among a very broad cross-section of the Irish community. It is important that we include in the Constitution a standalone article dedicated to children, and that we acknowledge that children's rights are not subordinated to the rights of parents, but are recognised as being fundamental in themselves. Supreme Court Judge Catherine McGuinness noted almost 20 years ago that the Constitution may be, and I quote, interpreted as giving a higher value to the rights of parents than to the rights of children, end of quote. Since that time, successive governments have examined the issue, but until now, no action has been taken. So while these matters were being examined, for example, in the Roscommon incest case, the state was prevented from acting to defend abused and neglected children. The parents of these poor children brought a successful High Court challenge to prevent Child Protection Services from acting, and the children, of course, then continued to suffer. So there's an anomaly that exists from the present interpretation in relation to the constitutional provisions, and that is something that needs to be eliminated. For most children, the best place to be is with their families, and the proposed amendment does not alter the assumption in law that this is the case. However, for a small number of children, this is not always the case. The proposed amendment provides for when and how intervention by the state should occur. It will ensure that in exceptional cases where, due to parental failure, the safety and welfare of any child is at risk, in that situation the focus will be on addressing the impact of that failure on the child. For these children, this referendum will ensure that the state can provide early intervention and family support to protect them in their home, by providing constitutional recognition to the concept of, quote, proportionate, unquote, responses to child protection concerns. Where such efforts are not successful, the state can then ultimately go further in ensuring the child's protection and, if required, make alternative arrangements. The proposed rights and protections incorporated in the amendment are for the benefit of all children, irrespective of the marital status of their parents. The aim is that children of married and non-married parents will be treated equally when it comes to protecting their safety or welfare. Their access to adoption and consideration of their best interests and views in key proceedings. They will all be taken into consideration. In particular, the amendment provides for the making of legislation to allow for adoption where it is in the best interest of a child in foster care due to the serious and persistent failure of their parents, irrespective of their parents' marital status. It also facilitates the making of legislation to allow for the voluntary placement of a child for adoption. The aim of these changes is to give children in foster care a better opportunity to experience the security of a loving, caring family. So I welcome the fact that Minister Fitzgerald has also published the Draft Adoption Amendment Bill 2012, which the Government plans to bring before the Oireachtas on the passing of this referendum.
Just a minute left, Minister.
The proposed amendment also requires that the best interests of the child should be the paramount consideration, and the voice of the child given due weight in court proceedings taken by the state relating to child protection and in relation to adoption, guardianship, custody and access, and that should be the case wherever possible, that the voice of the child should be heard. So by voting yes on the 10th of November, the Irish people will remove inequalities in adoption and help ensure that vulnerable children are not denied the help and support that they may require. And finally, can I say that this is a child-centred approach, both the legislation and the referendum proposals. There are at the present time, last year, approximately 1,500 children that were identified as having been abused, either sexually or physically or emotionally, and that 30,000 were dealt with in terms of protection and welfare. So that's a very sizable number of the children of the country. It is very important that we get the basic framework document right. That is the Constitution. That is the determining body of rights which we have, for the present, up to the present time, we have denied the children of this country. That is what we propose to do on the 10th of November, and I want to ensure and would love to ensure that this comes with the highest possible percentage of the Irish people voting yes. So I think the obligation is on us, Las Concorla, to ensure that all sides of this House were in favour of this legislation, and all sides are, that we get good campaigns out on the ground to ensure that that is the case. Thank you.